Paris is the city of love, with its enchanting streets, breathtaking architecture, and romantic ambiance that never fails to captivate the heart of lovers. Standing tall and majestic, the Eiffel Tower is not just a symbol of Paris, but also a symbol of love, as it embodies the beauty, strength, and enduring nature of true love. Oh, hey, would you like to buy it? Yeah, the Eiffel Tower, $6 million, and it can be yours. What? Do I have the authority to sell the Eiffel Tower? Sure, see my fancy government stationery? Duh. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell ya. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. The French 75 was given its name in honor of the 75mm light field gun that was utilized by the French during World War I. Throughout the 20th century, the gun came to represent a significant source of hope in the media as it related to the war against Germany. The original name for the beverage was 75. Like that French? High school French. It literally translates to 75. After some time, this drink became known as the 75 cocktail and eventually got its current moniker, the French 75. I gotta say, I looked this up, the gun, and my gut instinct was that it was a little handgun, and my friends, this is not a little handgun. It's actually kind of an old model, designed I think in 1897, but the picture will show you if you're on YouTube. The size of this thing would definitely bring me some hope during the bleakest parts of World War I. And you know what else would bring me some hope? A cocktail. This cocktail has always had gin in it, although previous versions of the drink included something called Applejack Bonded, which apparently is just apple brandy. This consistently popular drink was first referenced in a 1915 Washington Herald article. The standard for serving this drink is in a champagne glass, but apparently I don't have any of those, so we're just gonna do a cocktail glass. To craft our cocktail, we will take 2 parts gin, 1 part lemon juice, 1 part simple syrup, and add those to a shaker with ice. After shaking well, until well chilled in fact, we'll pour it into our glass, don't strain this time, and top with champagne. For the mocktail, take 2 parts non-alcoholic gin, 1 part lemon juice, and 1 part simple syrup. Add those to your ice-filled shaker. Shake it up and pour into a glass. Top with tonic water and enjoy. This is absolutely one of my favorite drinks of the season so far, and it is perfect for summer. Victor Lustig was born on January 4th, 1890 in then Bohemia. Bohemia was a historical area in Central Europe that was located in what is now the western section of the Czech Republic. The Bohemian lifestyle, with its emphasis on artistic and intellectual pursuits, creativity, and nonconformity, would become kind of synonymous with Victor himself. He had Bohemia in his bones, it seems. Say it with me now. More on that later. I wasn't able to find too much on his upbringing or parents, but in at least one interview, Victor evidently bragged that his dad was the mayor of his hometown, Hostine. But the real truth is, like many of our Capers and Cocktails main characters, Victor grew up in poverty. Even Victor, in later interviews, would say his folks were the, quote, poorest peasant people, end quote. Regardless of his economic circumstances, Vic was a smart kid who got straight A's and learned to speak 5 languages, which would definitely come in handy in his conman adulthood. He was popular, flirty, and led a relaxed life. He grew to be 5'7" tall and weighed a slight 140 pounds. Evidently, one formative day in Victor's childhood would change little Vic's life. When he was at school, he saw a kid do something wrong, rule-breaking, something. Upon confronting the ne'er-do-well, they got into a huge fight, and Victor found himself bruised and broody. This pivotal moment in his life led him to a new philosophy: steal to survive, but only from those who are dishonest and greedy. Listen, I can't really tell you how a schoolyard fight led to that philosophy, but that's what he said. Or at least that's what the internet says he said. Maybe the kid he beat up was rich. I don't know. Don't think too hard about it. Anyway, As a plucky 19-year-old in the early 1900s, college student Vic moved to Paris and started his criminal career as, you guessed it, a pickpocket. But he progressed quickly in the criminal underbelly of Paris by becoming the ultimate hustler. After leaving his collegiate studies, Victor started learning card tricks. He perfected every card trick known, and by the time he was an adult, Slick Vic could make a deck of cards, quote, do everything but talk, end quote. Seems like he was using his smarts for evil. Well, I guess that could be predicted for capers and cocktails, am I right? He may not have been so smart when it came to the ladies or their jealous boyfriends, as at some point in his late teens or early 20s, he ended up in a scuffle that gave him a 2.5-inch scar on his left temple and cheekbone that he carried with him for the rest of his life. Slick Vic's first big cons revolved around first-class passengers on transatlantic steamships from France to New York City. He would sail first class and disguise both himself and his true intentions, coming up with a variety of cons to make money off of the unsuspecting elite. Among the sophisticated tourists he conned was with a story he sold in which he pretended to be a musical producer looking for funding for a fictitious Broadway production. Does that sound familiar? I hope so. Anyway, remember folks, steal from the rich, eat the rich, whatever. When World War I hit, however, this con was going to have to hop to the back burner. After the sinking of the Lusitania on May 7th, 1915, steamships weren't really, going transatlantically as often. Or I should say, passenger steamships took a little breaksy. So Victor had to reinvent himself in his con, which of course he did. Victor's capers in the United States, where he had relocated, included pretending to have seizures during business meetings, making false real estate investments, and running fake horse racing scams. He was becoming quite the rich Vic. And then, to get richer, he invented what would undoubtedly be the most successful con of his career, the Romanian money box. The Romanian money box, named because it was invented after World War II. After World War II is when Romania became Romania, and for no other reason, because this box no more came from Romania than it did produce money. At this point, Tricky Vic could sell a glass of water to someone drowning. He could sell ice to a polar bear. He could sell a ketchup popsicle to a man wearing white gloves. Okay, you get it. All right, the box. The box itself was a specially made mahogany box that was actually quite large, the size of a steamer trunk to be exact. There were 2 tiny compartments in the box for storing cash and the paper needed to print the copies. There was a fake set of levers and gears that needed to be operated in a hidden chamber in order to make the copies. Inside this gadget was evidently a mechanism that by operating these levers and gears, plus a secret chemical process and some rigmarole and abracadabra, and voila, you would instantly have a duplicate of whatever bill you put inside. Okay, not instantly. The catch here is that it took the machine 6 hours to create that identical copy. No mind, 6 hours is a really short amount of time to double your money when you think about it in the long run. So Victor had several of the Romanian boxes crafted by a New York carpenter and headed out to find the perfect customer. The key to this con, and a lot of his cons, was to get an in the criminal underworld he was targeting. In one of his scams, he pickpocketed a wealthy gambler and then magically found this guy's missing wallet and returned it full of the cash it had been lost with. Trust secured. He'd then, mention something about the box, but hem and haw, spending a load of time saying he wouldn't show them how the box worked, knowing full well he was definitely going to show them how it worked. He'd stick a big old bill in the box, usually $1,000, take a peek at his watch, and then suggest they do something to pass the time. Something that conveniently would not involve being anywhere near eyesight of the box. A buddy of Victor's would then find a bill that was almost identical, just one serial number off, and rub the last serial number away so that it seemed kind of like an old dollar bill, and then slip that $1,000 bill or whatever it was into the box while these guys were off playing cards somewhere. After the 6 hours, Victor would say, "Hey, check out my work, go deposit it." But be sure to do 2 separate deposits. These will have the same serial number after all. Naturally, every person who saw that ruse was ready to spend whatever it took to be able to double their money, guaranteed. The box would be preloaded with some $1,000 bills to give Victor and his buddies some time to skip town, as well as the 6 hours. And they would definitely purchase it, and they'd hand it right over to them. And this was almost the perfect ruse. These guys weren't about to go to the cops and say they'd been taken by a literal counterfeiting machine. They were gonna keep their mouths shut. Oh, but more on one guy who wouldn't be taken a little later. Well, he was taken twice, but anyway, more later. And a side note, at some point along the way, Victor gave himself a title, Count. It was as counterfeit as his Romanian money box bills, and I don't know if he did this on purpose, but counterfeiting money, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Especially because this man was as much a count as Chocula, and he'd have many people believing differently. The Count was known to dress suavely, and he traveled in a chauffeured limousine. He never used counterfeit money in his own personal business because he was no dummy. Newspapers would describe him as a literal storybook character and a reserved, dignified, noble man. One Secret Service agent would say he was, quote, as elusive as a puff of cigarette smoke and as charming as a young girl's dream, end quote. And elusive is kind of an understatement. He had dozens of fake passports and at least 47 aliases. He had a trunk of disguises that he carried with him everywhere, allowing him to seamlessly transform into a bellhop, a priest, or any other number of characters. He escaped from jail more than once, especially if it looked like he was going to lose at a trial. Slippery Vic indeed. In 1925, Vic relocated back to France. Reading a newspaper article on the challenges of maintaining the Eiffel Tower while he was in Paris gave him the inspiration for, you guessed it, a new con. The most symbolic feature, I suppose, in Paris and maybe all of France is undoubtedly the Eiffel Tower. It is one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, in the whole world. It was designed by Gustave Eiffel and his team, and construction was completed in 1889 to both celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution and serve as the entrance arch to the 1889 World's Fair. On a side note, can we bring the World's Fair back? It seems like the coolest thing ever. I mean, I would have rocked a World's Fair. By 1925, the Eiffel Tower was in its mid-30s and the condition was deteriorating. Can relate, Eiffel Tower, can relate. Paris was incurring increasing costs to repair and repaint it, and this put a light bulb squarely over Victor's head. He put to work a forger to create some fake government stationery and invented a new identity for himself. Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The longer the title, the more likely it is to be true, I guess. Anyway, at a private scrap metal trader conference in a fancy Parisian hotel, Count Vic started working his magic. Upkeep of the Eiffel Tower was too expensive for Paris. It must be sold for scrap, but it must be kept a secret until after the latest election. There's no need to reveal a likely highly controversial decision, and it would undoubtedly cause some public outcry. After all, the reputation of you all as honest businessmen precedes you. Slippery Vic quickly set his sights on André Poisson, the guy who had expressed the most interest in purchasing the tower and whose last name means fish. Vic set up a private meeting with Mr. Fish and convinced him to pay a separate bribe in order to be the official scrap dealer of the Eiffel Tower, a contractor that only the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs could hire, naturally. But after the sale, to the tune of 70,000 1925 francs, or $6 million 2023 dollars, the Deputy Director General fled to Austria. Really rich Vic kept a close eye on the press when in Austria. He wanted to make sure that André didn't squeal, and indeed, Mr. Fish did not. Apparently, $6 million wasn't enough, as Vic returned to Paris later that same year to try and run the scam again. Unfortunately, or fortunately, police were alerted to the con, and Slippery Vic slipped town and headed back to America to avoid capture. I'm really enjoying the nicknames this upload, if you have not noticed. Unfortunately, also for Richie Vicky was the 1929 crash of the stock market and the slip into the Great Depression. Time for a new con, and this time it was unusually dangerous. He aimed it squarely at Al Capone. Al Capone was a notorious American gangster and one of the most famous criminals of the 20th century. He was a powerful figure in organized crime, involved in activities such as bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. Al was also known for his violent tactics and was responsible for numerous murders during his reign. Victor was well aware of the risk, knowing he'd likely be sleeping with the fishes if this con didn't work, and I don't mean Mr. Fish. So Vic made this a slow con. Al agreed to invest $50,000 in one of Vic's shady deals, and Vic actually just kept the money safe for 2 months. He then returned every single penny, saying that the business had fallen through. Trust secured. He then convinced Al to give him $5,000 just to tide him over. While that's almost $100,000 in today's money, it was a drop in the bucket, it seems, for both Al and Vic. It seems like Richie Vicky was just conning Al Capone for fun to say that he did it. Bragging rights. In 1930, slippery Count Vic decided that he would prefer to push the con bigger and bigger. Using paper, plates, and ink that simulated the microscopic red and green threads of real bills, the Count and a Nebraska scientist named Tom Shaw established a real counterfeiting enterprise. More than $100,000 a month were sent through a complex network of couriers who were unaware that they were transporting a hell of a lot of counterfeit money. Despite a large counterfeit ring, selling the Eiffel Tower once and almost twice, plus several arrests and escapes from prison, it would be the Romanian money box that would bring Count Vic down. Later that same year that the massive counterfeiting ring was started, the Secret Service arrested a Texas sheriff on charges of passing counterfeit bills in New Orleans. That sheriff wasn't passing just any counterfeit bills, however, but dollars given to him by none other than Count Victor Lustig himself. You see, a few years prior, Victor had conned this Texas sheriff and county tax collector, is anyone surprised, out of $123,000 with his money box scheme. When the understandably furious sheriff had tracked Victor down in Chicago, Slippery Vic convinced the sheriff that, well, the sheriff just didn't know how to use the machine right. But Vic also gave him a load of cash, which, as it turns out, was, I'm sure you're surprised, counterfeit. Furious that Slippery Vic had given him the fake bills, the lawman gave a full description of Victor to the authorities, down to that big old scar on his cheek. That wouldn't keep the sheriff out of prison, but it gave the Secret Service something to go on. By this point, these phony bills were everywhere. Authorities referred to the fake money as Lustig money, and there was so much of it in circulation that there were genuine worries that the entire monetary system of the United States would be disrupted. But they don't call him Slippery Vic for nothing. Actually, no one calls him Slippery Vic but me. Yeah, but they couldn't seem to get their hands on him until... Okay, pause here. I think we've had at least 3 cases this year alone where the cause of the capture of the criminal was a jilted lover. Victor's then-girlfriend, Billie Mae, discovered that Cheater Vic was having an affair. In order to, exact her revenge, she made an anonymous call. And no, I have no idea how they know it's her if the call was anonymous, so don't even ask. To the police and told them exactly where soon-to-be captured Vic was staying in New York City. Federal agents would arrest him on May 10th, 1935, at the corner of 74th Street and Broadway in Manhattan. Say it with me, folks. Keep your ladies happy. Incarcerated Vic was charged with forgery, but he naturally feigned innocence. He knew his partners were terrible people and con men, but not him, not a count. But when they found a key in his possession, they tracked it down to a locker in the subway station in Times Square that contained printing plates for counterfeit money and also $51,000 in fake bills. Whoops. Vic would tell prison officials that they would never be able to keep him in jail. The night before his trial, Slippery, no longer incarcerated Vic, used some rope that he had fashioned from 2 bed sheets to escape the Federal House of Detention in New York City, a very difficult prison to escape. He was dressed in his prison-issued clothes, but he just pretended to be a window washer, and none of the passersby did anything about the fact that he was shimmering down the side of the prison. I don't know. He left a note from Les Miserables on his pillow. Quote, he allowed himself to be led in a promise. Jean Valjean had his promise, even to a convict, especially to a convict. It may give the convict confidence and guide him on the right path. Law was not made by God, and man can be wrong." End quote. It was a short-lived freedom, as he was caught less than a month later in Pittsburgh on September 28, 1935, after a 9-block car chase with his driver. Vic would tell his captors, quote, "Well, boys, here I am," end quote. He pleaded guilty for his crimes and received a 15-year sentence for the original crime and an additional 5 years for his escape. He was sent to carry out his sentence at the Rock itself, Alcatraz Island. During its time as a federal prison from 1934 to 1963, Alcatraz housed some of the most dangerous and notorious criminals of its time, including Al Capone, and the prison's location on an island in San Francisco Bay made escape attempts extremely difficult. In the 29 years that Alcatraz operated as a federal prison, there were 14 escape attempts involving 36 prisoners. However, all of these attempts were unsuccessful, or at least we think they were all unsuccessful. Don't come at me for that one. Anyway, most of the escapees in those cases were captured or killed. It makes a lot of sense that they would send no longer slippery Vic there. Alcatraz had the distinct ability of making criminals a bit less slippery. When he arrived at Alcatraz on April 27, 1936, Count Vic was searched for hidden weapons and hosed down with freezing seawater. They marched him to his cell through the main cell block area completely naked, which at least superficially humiliated the Count. Throughout his short time at Alcatraz, he made a large number of medical and prescription requests. According to prison records, he was, quote, inclined to magnify physical complaints and constantly complaining of real and imaginary ills, end quote. It seems that guards thought that this was part of a complicated plot to escape. The Count would not ever get that chance. Emil Lustig would report that his brother died on March 11, 1947 at Alcatraz, his death drawing almost no attention despite his colorful and flamboyant life. It turns out, however, that Victor Lustig died of pneumonia after being transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 57 years old. Victor's occupation was listed as apprentice salesman and counterfeiter on his death certificate. I think we could argue he wasn't much of an apprentice. Also, his death certificate indicated that not only had he married at some point to a woman named Susan Miller, but he also had a daughter, Elizabeth Schwartz, who lived in Hollywood at the time of his death. This is like the only time I saw anything about those humans, so who the heck knows? His death name was listed as Robert Miller, which, as it turns out, was just one of those 47 aliases. He fooled them even in death. At some point during his illustrious career, Count Victor Lustig put together a list, the 10 Commandments for conmen, if you will. It goes as follows. 1. Be a patient listener. It is this, not fast talking, that gets a conman his coup. 2. Never look bored. 3. Wait for the other person to reveal any political opinions, then agree with them. 4. Let the other person reveal religious views, then have the same ones. 5. Hint at sex talk, but don't follow it up unless the other person shows a strong interest. 6. Never discuss illness unless some special concern is shown. 7. Never pry into a person's personal circumstances. They'll tell you all eventually. 8. Never boast. Just let your importance be quietly obvious. 9. Never be untidy. And 10. Never get drunk. It seems like these commandments did him well in his lifetime and in general would be a surefire way to make friends and maybe influence some people. There's no definitive amount of money that Count Victor Lustig conned during his lifetime, but he is consistently listed as one of the most notorious conmen of all time. For decades after his capture, federal authorities would compare the work of those they captured to the Count, sometimes saying that their work was, quote, the best since Count Lustig, end quote. Thanks for hanging out with me. I love conmen. I know it's not a victimless crime, but it certainly feels that way, or at least victimless, if you know what I mean. I just wish I could get inside the brains of these folks. They're very obviously geniuses. It's too bad that they so often get caught, probably because they choose to do illegal things. I didn't realize how similar Victor Lustig and Adam Worth, the Napoleon of crime, were. They were sort of contemporaries, although Victor was only 12 when Adam died, so they definitely didn't know each other or ever meet each other. But something makes me think they would have been pretty good friends. What's the dumbest thing you've ever fallen for? I bet some of Victor's victims could answer that question, and so can you if you visit and follow the Keepers and Cocktails Instagram. All the links are at www.keepersandcocktails.com with the "and" spelled out, or you can just search for @Capers and Cocktails, yes, with the "and" spelled out on the gram. I hope you'll join the conversation. Anyway, next week we're doing a short little ditty to make up for all the minutes I've cost you these past few uploads. The drink is a rum runner, which requires unique ingredients, including blackberry brandy. The guy at the liquor store did not even know that he carried it or what it was for. It's also time for another banana drink, which I'll admit I'm a bit scarred. I'm scarred from my attempt at banana margarita like 2 years ago, which was by far the worst drink I've ever made. I'm gonna give the banana another try though, and maybe you'd like to as well. The ingredients are in the description box as always. I'll see you next week, and remember, use your big ol' brains for good.